Since April, Donald Trump has been pushing aggressively for new trade deals following sweeping tariff announcements that targeted both allies and rivals. The administration framed these moves as part of a broader effort to rebalance global commerce, insisting that long-standing partners contribute more to the U.S. economy. Several agreements were announced in the months that followed, and Trump himself declared them historic, presenting them as proof of American leverage on the world stage. Yet only a short time later, many of those deals are under growing scrutiny. Close allies are questioning whether the costs outweigh the benefits, and some are beginning to step back altogether. The most striking part of this trend is that the resistance is not coming from U.S. adversaries. It is emerging from traditional allies, nations with deep military, economic, and diplomatic ties to Washington. For these countries, the demands of the Trump administration are proving difficult, if not impossible, to accept. At the center of this dispute lies a proposed trade deal that was supposed to mark a turning point, easing tariffs and boosting investment. Instead, it has sparked warnings of financial instability, political mistrust, and renewed friction across the Indo-Pacific. And in a striking move, the leader of this nation has gone on record to say that accepting Washington's current terms could push his country into a crisis rivaling the devastating financial collapse of the late 1990s. The country in question is South Korea. Yesterday, President Lee Jae-myung has delivered his sharpest rebuke yet of U.S. demands tied to trade and investment, casting doubt on whether the once-promoted deal with President Donald Trump's administration can ever be finalized. In an exclusive interview with Reuters, Lee made clear that Seoul is prepared to step back if Washington refuses to compromise. The core of the disagreement centers on a verbal agreement reached in July between the United States and South Korea. Washington pledged to ease Trump-era tariffs on Korean goods. In return, Seoul was expected to commit an extraordinary $350 billion in investment into the U.S. economy. At first glance, the deal looked like a political and economic win for both sides. Trump could claim billions in foreign investment as a victory for his America First trade policy. South Korea would gain tariff relief and potentially a smoother path for its exports in key industries, especially automobiles and electronics.
But the devil, as President Lee stressed, is in the details.
The U.S. has demanded that this investment come in cash and be directed according to decisions made in Washington, effectively giving the Trump administration control over where and how South Korean funds would be deployed. Lee warned that such a massive cash withdrawal would wreak havoc on Seoul's financial markets. Without safeguards such as a currency swap agreement, South Korea's economy could face a shock similar to the 1997 Asian financial crisis, when the country required an emergency bailout from the International Monetary Fund. That crisis led to years of painful restructuring, mass layoffs, and a sharp decline in living standards. To avoid a repeat of history, South Korea has proposed a foreign exchange swap line with the United States, essentially a financial safety net. A swap line allows two central banks to exchange currencies directly with each other. So, if South Korea suddenly needs U.S. dollars to stabilize its markets, the Bank of Korea could obtain them quickly from the Federal Reserve, instead of relying on private investors or volatile markets. This matters because big cash outflows like the $350 billion Washington is demanding can weaken the Korean won. If too much money leaves the country at once, the value of the currency can drop sharply. That makes imports more expensive, raises debt costs for companies that borrowed in dollars, and can spark panic among investors. A swap line would act like a pressure valve, ensuring South Korea has the dollar liquidity it needs to calm markets and prevent a free fall. The U.S. has offered swap lines to select allies before, including Japan, the European Central Bank, and during emergencies other major economies. But in this case, Washington has shown little interest in granting the same safeguard to Seoul, leaving South Korea exposed if the trade deal goes ahead under the current terms. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, representing the Trump administration, argued that South Korea should simply follow the example of Japan, which struck a trade deal earlier this year. Yet, as Lee pointed out, Tokyo is in a far stronger position. Japan holds more than double South Korea's $410 billion in foreign exchange reserves, enjoys an internationalized currency in the yen, and already maintains a swap line with the U.S. South Korea does not have the same financial cushion. Demanding identical terms, Lee argued, is both unrealistic and dangerous. Complicating matters further is a recent U.S. immigration raid that saw more than 300 South Korean workers detained at a Hyundai motor battery plant in Georgia. Images of the workers in shackles spread quickly, sparking outrage in South Korea and raising questions about the security of Korean investment in the United States. Lee acknowledged the anger but sought to contain the fallout, emphasizing that he did not believe Trump personally ordered the raid. Instead, he described it as the work of overzealous officials.
Trump reportedly offered to let the workers remain, and the U.S. government issued an apology. Still, the optics of the incident reinforced skepticism in Seoul about Washington's reliability as a partner. The strain is especially significant because of the broader context of U.S.-South Korea relations. The two countries are not only economic partners but also military allies. Roughly 28,500 U.S. troops are stationed on the Korean peninsula as part of a defense arrangement dating back to the Korean War. Lee has insisted that security cooperation will continue, but the separation of defense talks from trade negotiations underscores the transactional approach of the Trump administration. While South Korea has accepted increased contributions to its defense burden, trade remains the unresolved flashpoint. Lee also addressed relations with North Korea, China, and Russia during his Reuters interview. His remarks revealed a bleak outlook for inter-Korean diplomacy. Pyongyang has rebuffed Seoul's overtures, and Lee admitted that prospects for renewed talks are slim. Meanwhile, the alignment of North Korea, Russia, and China presents new strategic headaches. Just this month, Kim Jong-un stood beside Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping at a Beijing military parade, highlighting the deepening ties among these states. Lee described the situation as a dangerous division between a socialist bloc and a capitalist democratic camp that includes South Korea. The risk, he warned, is an escalatory spiral in which the US, Japan, and South Korea strengthen their security cooperation, prompting Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang to draw even closer together. For South Korea, sitting at the geographic crossroads of this rivalry, the stakes could not be higher. Lee's relationship with Donald Trump has been complex. Their first summit in August produced no joint statement or concrete agreement. But Lee has described developing a strong personal connection with the U.S. president. He even praised Trump for handling the Hyundai raid aftermath responsibly. Yet trust only goes so far. Trump has publicly insisted that he will personally select and control the South Korean investments, reinforcing Lee's concerns about commercial feasibility. Seoul insists that any projects must be commercially viable, but working-level talks have failed to bridge the gap. This impasse, Lee acknowledged, could drag negotiations into the next year, prolonging uncertainty for businesses, markets, and the alliance itself. The shadow of the 1997 financial crisis looms large over this dispute. At that time, South Korea's economy collapsed under the weight of short-term foreign debt, forcing the government to seek a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. The memory of that collapse continues to influence Korean policymakers. The crisis exposed structural weaknesses. Chaebols, the country's powerful conglomerates, had borrowed heavily from overseas lenders, often without regard to profitability. When global conditions turned and foreign investors pulled out, the system unraveled. The won's value plunged, foreign exchange reserves dried up, and several of Korea's largest conglomerates went bankrupt. To stabilize the economy, Seoul accepted IMF conditions that included bank restructurings, austerity measures, high interest rates, and mass layoffs. While the program restored confidence, the social costs were severe. Unemployment surged, thousands of businesses closed, and ordinary Koreans were left to shoulder the burden. One defining symbol was the nationwide gold collecting campaign of 1998, when millions donated jewelry to help repay foreign debt. For today's leaders, the lesson is clear. Large capital outflows without safeguards can destabilize the economy overnight. In 1997, the won fell from roughly 800 to more than 1,700 per U.S., erasing savings and multiplying the cost of foreign debt. Accepting Washington's demand for $350 billion in cash investments without protections such as a currency swap could create a similar vulnerability. That is why President Lee frames the U.S. proposal as an existential risk. The scars of 1997 remain fresh, and no South Korean government can afford to repeat them. Lee's warnings are not rhetorical. A sudden withdrawal of $350 billion without safeguards could trigger capital flight, destabilize the won, and rattle investor confidence. The risk is not just theoretical, it is rooted in South Korea's own history. Pressed on whether South Korea is prepared to walk away entirely, Lee stopped short of a definitive answer, but made his stance clear. Between blood allies, we will be able to maintain the minimum amount of rationality. In diplomatic language, this is a thinly veiled ultimatum. Unless Washington shows flexibility, Seoul is ready to step back from the deal. The consequences would be far-reaching. For Trump, losing a $350 billion investment commitment would undercut a signature trade policy achievement. For South Korea, rejecting the deal may preserve financial stability, but at the cost of heightened friction with its closest security partner. This dispute is more than a bilateral squabble. It reflects a shifting global order where alliances are strained by economic nationalism, domestic politics, and geopolitical rivalries. South Korea's resistance to U.S. demands signals that even Washington's closest allies are no longer willing to absorb unlimited costs in the name of partnership. The message is clear. The era of automatic alignment is over. And as the Indo-Pacific becomes the focal point of global competition, the decisions made in Seoul and Washington will reverberate far beyond their borders. The story may end here, but my request to you is just beginning. This channel has no sponsors, no corporations, no safety net. It exists only because of people like you. If you believe truth should never be for sale, then I need your help. Subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every click, every comment, every subscription is a signal to the algorithm that independent voices matter, that truth matters. It may seem small, but together, it's the only way a channel like this can grow, and the only way truth can survive.